This is Tyler, your antisocial critic and the host of the AntiSocial Network, your number one source for anachronistic conversations online. Come join us each week to hear opinions from some of the best voices discussing entertainment, politics, religion, and modern life on the internet today, most of which you've never heard of, but I have. This week on Antisocial Entertainment, we're joined by Lindsey Dunn, author of oneofmystories.com and general online film critic. I know you just got finished, I believe, judging a film festival. How's it going?
It's going great. Yep, I am still recovering from the film festival, and also I still have 4 movies to finish writing about. But it's going well. It's Friday. We're ready to start the weekend, and I get to do that with you.
Well, there you go. So what was the film festival like for you? Was this your first time doing one, or?
Oh, no. This is my 3rd time at Film Fest 919. It is a local festival. It's a great festival. The founders, Randy Emmerman and Carol Marshall, they set it up. I feel very fortunate. They curate the festival. Every time they make the selections, all the movies are great. It's a variety of genres, and usually all of these are the movies that are going to get recognized during awards season. And it's there were fewer films than usual, I feel like, but it used to start at like 10 a.m. It would go from like 10 a.m. sometimes to midnight. This festival, it really started at about 12:30 or 2 each day, and the last movie usually showed around 7. So fewer films to cover, but you get to meet other critics, and some of them fly in from LA, so it's definitely starting to gain a reputation.
Well, that's good. I've had my fair share of long film festival days, so I get where that's coming from. And after a while, you get burned out real fast. And it's not that it's strenuous; it's just you don't get a break. You
don't think it's tiring to it can be tiring to sit and watch movies all day. You have to pace yourself and get up and stretch and walk around a little bit.
Yeah, and plus you're doing it for work, so you really don't have any excuse to miss any of them. Like, remember when I went to my film, the last one I went to, I got extremely exhausted to the point where I was like, okay, I'm going to skip one and go take a nap. Turns out the one I skipped was really good, and the one I came back for was awful. So I did not have good luck that day when I was trying to pick the ones I wanted to see. So
luckily, I'm my own editor, so I give myself my assignments, and sometimes you do have to miss one and go, okay, I will find another way to watch that one.
Well, go figure. So the thing we kind of decided we were going to discuss is the philosophy of film criticism, because it's something I've been thinking about a lot in the past year and a half, as as one tends to have a lot of time when they're when they're in COVID brain. But it's something I've thought about a lot, even beyond the last year and a half, going back to at least 2016, 2017, 2018, when a lot of the really hot culture war, film critics started coming out of the woodwork, and people started getting really, really passionate about things they didn't know anything about. So I've tried to figure out what it is a film critic actually is and should be in light of everything that's happened. And you sent me your article on what a film critic should be. I sent you several of my articles about what film criticism shouldn't be. I'm curious if we could figure out an answer to this question.
Well, is there a right and wrong answer? I feel like this is an evolving thing that each person, as they go along, you're going to do it a certain way. You're going to try it. You're going to work in that way. And then somebody might challenge you on that, and then you might try something different. But I don't know if there is a right answer. Do we all need to agree? I mean, who knows? Who's to say? But I think it is definitely something to compare with other critics, and you have to kind of come up with your own mission statement, I feel like, which is what I've tried to do. And maybe you've done it in a different way. You've written about, like you said, what it isn't, but kind of deciding for yourself. But it's definitely something to dialogue about, and hopefully as you go along, you can come up with something that you can be proud of.
I think that's a fair answer, but I mean, I think my problem is generally that I come at art from a standpoint that there needs to be some level of objectivity to the way they view arts as a whole. And I think that film criticism has become so democratized that it's really hard to actually have these discussions in any way in which people come to their table with any sort of similar value sets or an understanding of what the actual medium is supposed to be. I mean, nowadays there's such a deep demand for, I guess, populist art is the best way to put it. You know, the big budget blockbusters and stuff, which I love those. But the problem is, like, there's such a nostalgic memory hole for like 1980s blockbusters, where so many of these young film critic kids are like, why can't everything just be back like the way it was in 1985 when Raiders of the Lost Ark and The Thing and Star Wars, like they had this very specific image of like film as it was in a very specific moment, and that's their gauge for the entire medium. And it's very hard to argue with that because because it's so deeply emotionally tied to a lot of these people's adolescence. And it's not that there's anything wrong with that. It's just that it when you actually try to advance their knowledge of film, they get resistant to it. And they start saying things. They say that these interesting movies you start passing their way are pretentious or snobby, or they think too highly of themselves. This is how you get the Martin Scorsese train wreck that happened last year. It's like you mean objectively one of our best filmmakers gets like crapped on by half the internet because he doesn't like a certain kind of blockbuster that's endemic to the film industry right now. It's not a news story. Like, classic filmmakers don't have that much interest in commercial cinema. This is not a new thing. Like it became just a shocking thing. It's like, oh, he doesn't like the movies I like, and it became so deeply personal. And when you try to dig into these culture war anthills, it just all the fire ants start spewing out, and there's no way to actually have a productive conversation. Do you agree at all with with the problems I'm seeing, or am I taking this too big picture, or what do you think?
Well, you said a lot of things there, so I'm not.
This is my brain. I just have like bees like churning at all times up here. I can't help it. So,
I mean, culture changes over time. We know that. So I think that you were referencing the films of the 80s and 90s, and today a lot of our filmmakers, the new people on the scene, like the people that are getting recognized at, say, a Sundance Film Festival, I've noticed there is a lot of similarity when people will talk about, well, I really liked the films of John Carpenter, for instance. They were inspired by that, and they will talk about that when they release their statement. They'll reference that they watched these particular movies, and a lot of them are from the 80s and the 90s. And those were films that came out at that time, how the culture was. So part of my thinking sometimes is that the nostalgia they have isn't just for the movie, it's for the culture, because perhaps at that time, culture in general just seemed simpler to navigate. And I think that's absolutely true, that it was simpler to navigate. Now there's a lot more viewpoints, a lot more people vying for a voice on the floor, a voice at the table. And I think that's one of the things is that people don't like to be poo-pooed upon their viewpoint. And so the fact that Martin Scorsese came out and made the statement, sure, maybe it wasn't that surprising, yet he sort of made a line. He said, like, there's a standard, and like it was an objective standard for him. And that is something people didn't like, obviously, to say that. And a lot of what I think about is related to my job as a librarian. There's literary fiction, and then there's the popular fiction, or the contemporary fiction. And there can be a level of snobbery about books too, and people will kind of mock. I guess the most common one would be romance novels. There are all these jokes about people who read romance novels. Well, the romance novel people are like, we like our books just fine. You guys are snobs. And, so I think that I'm saying a lot of things now too, but when you critique a film today, part of it is understanding the culture we're in and what lens the film is coming from. You can also say the lens you're coming from. Sometimes those things, contradict each other. But you can recognize that somebody has this certain thing, this certain theme in the film because of this thing that's happening in our culture. And that's not a bad thing to point out. Sometimes it can be Professor Obvious kind of statement. But I'm not sure that we're in agreement about everything, but as far as is there an objective standard, I think one of the ways that I try to think of it is rather than say well, this is a high quality versus low quality, instead of trying to determine that, I might say, well, this type of movie is going to appeal to this type of viewer, and deal with it that way, so that you're not calling out one thing is good and one thing is bad, or one thing is high quality, but you're recognizing that people enjoy different things, and these are the people that are going to like this.
I think that's fair, and generally that's what I try to do with my reviews as well. I actively don't like numbering systems with movie reviews, because I think that it boils down the appeal and complex emotions of art to something and makes you stick a dipstick in it and try to take a measurement out of it. It's a very imprecise art. I mean, when you talk about something like romance novels, I mean, I have plenty of my indulgences. Like, I love Robert Bronze movies and canon action movies, and I'm happy to indulge in the Hallmark movies from here and from now and then. Or I know lots of people like Christian movies. I guess the knot that tends to really get my goat when it comes to criticism is the big boogeyman of anti-intellectualism, the knot of that makes it very hard to actually say X is better than Y for X reason when you're having a discussion. Because if I'm I don't want to say a Marvel movie is objectively not as good as a Martin Scorsese movie, because they're two different things that are doing different points. But it's at the same time, when you go to an art museum and you see one room with dogs playing poker and the next room is filled with medieval romantic Catholic art, you recognize that there's greater meaning and importance to the one, even though the other one is more commercially viable. Or you even see that a little bit with something like Thomas Kinkade, which the most who I like Thomas Kinkade paintings.
You do?
Yeah. But I will admit that there's a level of indulgent romanticism to his artwork, and I'm not going to put them on the same level as something more academically serious. I think that's part of my problem is that it's very hard to actually get people to nail down people in admitting that it's okay to like things that aren't necessarily the highest value, because it feels like a value judgment against them when you say that, which that's never my intention. I agree with you that there's a lot of value to saying this thing is made for this audience. It's not going to appeal to everyone. Romance novels, Hallmark movies, all that stuff. I think that there's, especially, when you go back to the old arguments of the couples in the 80s, is she likes rom-coms, he likes Charles Bronson movies. It's they don't get each other's movie tastes, because they're both indulgent tastes, really. But when it comes to film criticism, it gets really hard to actually talk about the medium, because there's so many different facets to it. where you do get populist art and more elite art to kind of being judged in the same lists. So if you're you're writing your top 10 of the list, how do you manage that in a way that actually squares it in a way that doesn't make everyone angry? And a lot of times you really can't, because you either your list is too elite and snobbish, or it's too there's too many action movies and Marvel movies on it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think we all have to. At the end of the day, when you're doing film criticism or analyzing any kind of art, you're having an opinion. You're having a personal. You are personally, approaching this thing, and it's hitting you a certain way, and based on where you are. I think one of the things you mentioned in one of your articles that I liked was you were talking about how good art challenges you and sort of, challenges your beliefs in a specific way. You didn't say beliefs, but I think there are times when you watch something and it kind of confronts one of your worldviews or one of the things you've always assumed to be true. Is that necessarily a factor of whether it's art or not? I don't know. I think that is definitely outcome of good storytelling. And so yeah, I think that's a good thing to talk about, is movies that kind of stop you and ask you to look at something different. So, when's the last time you watched a new movie, let's say, a newish movie, like in the last couple of years, that challenged a view that you have?
I'm sure if I dug up my lists, I could come up with a bunch. But the one I keep coming back to is Terrence Malick's A Hidden Life. I don't know if you've seen that one, but I think that's an amazing example of the kind of film that I would encourage people to seek out. Not because it's entertaining, because it's a 3-hour-long plotless art movie, but because it's a movie that creates this incredibly evocative experience where it places you in the mindset of someone and asks you to contemplate the nature of his decision and the nature of the morality behind his decision. Character who's going to die because he refuses to work to sign his name and serve the Nazis in the military. And at every point, people tell him, it's there's no reason for you to do this. There's no point in you doing this. There's ways out. You can get out of the situation just by doing this one thing. You can work menial labor for the Nazis. You can do anything else. And if you don't do it, your name is going to get wiped from history because you're irrelevant and your name is not actually doing anything. But it captures this amazing internality of realizing that your soul belongs to God, and that even when all these forces are against you, and you're literally sitting in a chair as the last seconds of your life tick by, you are still doing the right thing. You are still internally virtuous. And I think that that's such an amazing set of moral questions to ask people nowadays, especially since there's so much morality so deeply clouded by political tribalism and moral relativity and all these complex ways that we look at the world nowadays. I think that there's something to a movie like that. Well, where did we start this line of thought? I'm trailing a little bit.
We were talking about one of the statements you made in an article that
what's a good? Well, that's my example of a movie that's not necessarily changed my mind, but I think necessarily captured something in a way that I thought was powerful. That answers your question.
Yeah, it made you contemplate maybe how you would have handled that situation.
Yeah, and I would say I don't necessarily. I've developed a somewhat Chestertonian attitude towards the idea of art being transgressive, in the sense that I think that there's such a tendency nowadays to value being transgressive. More than anything now, I want art that actually just speaks to reality and truth. I want something that actually just captures something in an honest way. And I think that's the gauge of art. It's the ability to speak to the humanity of people in the world and actually edify it in some way, and and put in, not necessarily put it on a pedestal, but at least to explore it in a way that actually makes you contemplate things more deeply. And that's part of my reason for why I'm somewhat left cold with the blockbuster scene now. Not because it's bad. I mean, I can give you a list of 50 action movies I absolutely adore. Just that it's not scratching that itch for me as much as it used to anymore, and it annoys me when other people seem to value having that itch scratched over trying to, edify their life through some sort of deeper understanding of the world. Which might be the most elitist thing I've ever said in my life. But
well, I think you've hit on something there, which is the purpose for the reason people might watch movies can be very different. You are looking at it as an opportunity to grow, to learn, to see something on screen that it captivates you, whereas other people often watch things to blow off steam or waste time or relax. So these can all encourage you to watch different types of stories. Some people are looking for a thrill. In the book world, we noticed that a lot of people wanted to read maybe for a while, it hasn't been that way. People wanted to read feel-good reads during COVID. They were just like, I don't want to watch anything about stress or drama or life's woes. I want to watch something about joy and happiness and somebody having a good luck. So that's people were hungry for that. Whereas before COVID, when people were kind of on the go all the time and they're feeling like, life is a drag, everything's the same every day, you're like, let me watch something like a horror movie, just so I can feel something different, something scary to get me away from feeling bored or whatnot. So I think when people watch movies, they're looking for different things. I love movies and storytelling. It's probably my favorite thing. So I want to see, I wouldn't say everything, but I know what I like, and I'm interested in seeing new types of movies and getting to see new storytellers come on board. So that's how I pick things. I like to see movies that are about people on the fringes of society that we don't get to hear from. So that's what I gravitate to. But, that's not the way of other people. They might not have a lot of time to watch a movie. So they're like, when they sit down, just let me watch something that can help my mind tune out. It's the total opposite of what you're looking for.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree with what you're saying. I mean, I just moved to Nashville a couple weeks ago, and during the move, I tried putting on movies, and a lot of what I was watching was just too stressful for me. Like, I put on, an episode of Star Trek, and the drama behind the episode actually started getting to me in a way that actually wasn't conducive for me. And then I tried watching an episode of Chernobyl, and that really messed me up for like an entire evening. I'm like, I understand the emotional needs that are a component of this. Like, especially during COVID, people want comfort. People want something that's going to make them feel, escapist. They want something that's going to help them feel less connected to the world, because the world is genuinely awful, and I get that. But in ideal times, I think that there needs to be a balance to that, at least in terms of your overall consumption. Like, if you like junk action movies and then go out and read like philosophy every single night, or you're very dedicated to your religious studies, or you're focusing on reading complex political theory, like, I'm less concerned for that person than the person that doesn't have any sort of like countervalence to their media diet. Because I think that the thing that generally bothers me is when people have, they aren't interested in trying to push themselves, and they don't have something else that's like trying to push them ahead in some way. Because I think that if you want to like slack off in something, in one area of media, I think that's perfectly fine. But you need to kind of have that balance somewhere else in your life where you are getting something a little bit more, healthy, lean. It's like I compare media consumption to eating a lot, where it's good to it's okay if you eat out every once in a while, but if you are just eating bad food constantly, it's going to get into it's going to get into your body. And I think the same is true of media, where if you're only engaging in indulgent media and you don't have something else on the other side of it, then that's going to get into your soul in some regard, and it's going to make it harder for you to process things in some way. So my advice is just to, when times are better, put the effort in, and try to expand your horizons. That would be that's my point.
But who's to say? Who's to say when that needs to happen? Is it you? Like,
well, I'm not other people.
That might just when this statement that you made, that you get frustrated that people aren't maybe watching something with a little more depth. Is it possible that people go through different stages in their life where they want that versus don't want that?
Yeah, obviously. And I'm not criticizing anyone on an individual level here. I'm going after broad trends. I'm going after, other film critics who perpetuate it more than anything else. Because I know lots of people in my individual life who I talk to in individual, and I know what they do and their entertainment wise. I know what their spare times are like. I look at them and I say, this is someone that's living a well-rounded life. They're working hard. They care about their mental health, and they care about wisdom and virtue and actually living a full life. And I don't care that they go on Hulu every night and watch what's that really silly reality show about like celebrity dancing? Like what is the word, The Masked Dancer? Like, I know
Masked Singer.
yeah, that thing. A friend of mine sat me down and made me watch it, and I was it was a strange experience. But like I have no problem with people that have that. Like I'm not saying, I'm saying this as entirely as like an individual, a general statement about broader trends, not on anyone, not as a judgment to anyone's individual like media consumption. That's for you to decide and for you to figure out. I mean, what's important to you? What's actually brings joy and wisdom to your and virtue to your life? Though that's for you to figure out. I mean, I've had to make decisions about what things I want to prioritize in my time, because you only have so much time to do things, and I've got 100 million books I need to read and 100 million movies I want to catch at some point in my life, and you have to make time decisions. And I also work full-time job, and so I only get a few hours a night to make these decisions. And especially since the move, I've definitely been a lot more indulgent with my media consumption, like watching comfy television shows I like, stuff that isn't all that stressful or emotionally challenging, like you suggested. So it's not that I can judge for someone else. I'm appealing to the fact that there are healthy media diets and there are unhealthy media diets to some degree, and that's ultimately something you have to work out for yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, agreed.
I think the only question that we're probably disagreeing over is the level of objectivity that has to be involved here.
Right. I'd say so. I think one of the, I have evolved the way I do film criticism over 2 years, but the baseline, I think I remember somebody mentioning, is by the end of your review, you want to know if you would like to see this movie or not. That's what people are looking for. I know Roger Ebert used to say that even if you haven't seen the movie or you don't plan to see this movie, your review should also be entertaining, so that people just read it and they enjoy reading what you have to say because of the quality of your writing. But also, a lot of times I try to look at it from a historical viewpoint to say, as I'm watching this movie, is it referencing anything? And some of that, like we've already said, the directors will include in the publicity information about the movie, or you can just talk about what it reminds you of that you've watched before, because art comments on previous art too, and so that you are kind of, it adds to this language of cinema, and being able to talk about those things can be very objective. You can say this movie this movie is a descendant of Ghostbusters, and there's not going to be a lot of argument there, especially if you can make a case or just say like because of these reasons. So those are ways that you can be objective in your criticism.
Well, let's. I liked your description there of like of the film critic as a job, because it reminds me of an AMA that Jonathan Rosenbaum did years and years ago, where he said that one of the problems he has with a lot of film criticism is that the people that do it aren't good writers. Like there's it's more than anything, I think film criticism should be regarded as a job, like it's something that you do because it fulfills a certain role, and it's hard to actually define what that role is because there's so many people that do it nowadays, and in a lot of ways I think the free market has effectively ruined the concept of film criticism, because now you can go anywhere and there's 100 million reviews of literally every piece of media that ever comes out. It's you have to sort through a lot of people in order to find people that you agree with philosophically and their background, who actually have the talent to write and who had the time to do it consistently. And you don't really find a lot of the old school newspaper reporter film criticism where someone gets a film critic gig at a newspaper and they do that for their entire life, because we don't get that quite as much as it used to. Nowadays you find like one guy online who you nominally agree with on their sense of taste, and that ends up being your whole the whole spectrum of your understanding of the medium. And I think that can be a little bit limiting, and it can definitely make it harder for you to actually find things outside of your niche, which I get. Again, if we're talking about people that are just engaging in film for their escapist purposes, that's perfectly fine so far as you just want more recommendations for the thing you already like. But it also means it's harder to evaluate the medium as a whole.
Yeah. So, do you have a list of things? What do you think a film critic's job is? I mean, I have my list here, and we can talk about that. But
this circles back to the question. And
right.
the question, and it's a question, I haven't really sat down a specific set of tenets that I think that are the things that are you have to do to be a film critic. A lot of ways, I think the things that I've been fighting against are things I don't think a film critic should be. I don't think a film critic should be a consumer reporter. I don't think a film critic should, pander. I don't think a film critic should just limit himself to a specific niche unless he or she wants to focus on one specific genre, which I know lots of film critics that do that. One of my friends does only horror movies, and I think that's great. But I think that there's a outside of examples like that, I think there's a tendency where you can look at the film criticism as either not either useless or what am I trying to say? Film criticism is either so centralized to you that it doesn't challenge you, or that it's so above your head that it's useless to you. And I see that a lot nowadays with like the people that go online and they share screenshots of movies where the critic rating and the user rating are completely different, and either the comment that it's above it will be a tweet that says, "Yep, the audiences are so dumb. All the right people hate it," or it's like the dude from Eternals just said, like this past week. Or you get the opposite, where it's like, "Yep, the audiences know what real film is," and then the real film will be like Shrek 2 with 99% good user ratings, and I'm just like, "Oh my." So I both of those sentiments are off in some regard. It's just hard to actually nail it down in a way to say, what is the truth between these two statements? And you look at a lot of the more controversial films that come out, and the critics love it and the audiences hate it. And which one is the real? What is the real, true, objective opinion? And I think that there is an objective opinion to be found there, but the opinion is not that the film. Well, it might be that the film is objectively good and that an audience hates it for a specific reason, or the movie is objectively bad and film critics like it for some obscure reason. But the truth is usually that people are having violent emotional reactions to it because of some aspect of the film. And more than anything else, that's the conversation that needs to be had. And of course, it's not the conversation that's being had because you get people online that do 5-hour videos about how X movie has 1 million plot holes, or all that stuff. Like the whole YouTube genre of long form video reviews is just it has a lot of problems. Mm-hmm. So to circle back, I don't have a pure answer for what a film critic should be. I think in some ways a film critic, the best answer I've come up with is that a film critic is someone who helps explain your emotions to you. I think that it's someone who looks at the state of the medium and is able to speak to all of it in a way that makes the reader feel like that their emotional reaction makes sense, or at least helps people make sense of their emotional reaction to it, more so than anything else. Because I think most people, when they go see a movie that's controversial, they tend to pick up on certain things, and that ends up being their reaction. Like something like The Last Jedi, which is still creating film criticism Inc. 4 years later. Or if something like, Annihilation was a little bit controversial. Ghostbusters 2016 was controversial. Like all these films, it's hard to actually sit down an objective opinion about it because they're so loaded. But I think part of the truth of being a film critic and looking at these movies is being able to help people who are having these emotional reactions figure out what that reaction is, and then being able to properly say, what about the film is causing those reactions? At least that's what I try to do.
The emotional reactions. Can you be more specific about what you mean? Like, you mean the fact that people were upset about a certain movie?
Well, when you look at, like, I don't know what your opinions on Ghostbusters The Last Jedi are, but it doesn't really matter for this conversation. Like, the reactions people had were they either love the movie so much that they think that anyone who hates it is bigoted or hateful, or on the other side, the people that are so violently offended about it that they're, writing long-form letters to the cast and crew of those films and saying how their lives were ruined by those films. Like that kind of emotional reaction where their experience of engaging with the film was so fundamentally frustrating that it doesn't seem to go away after years and years. I mean, even something like The Phantom Menace, you still see that reaction where it's like, you'll sit down a random person you talk to and they'll still talk about how much those the Star Wars prequels destroyed their childhood. Like that kind of emotional reaction. And I'm not saying those reactions are good or bad. They're reactions.
I understand you're not taking a side. I don't know, those sound like, again, I don't know if that seems like film criticism to me. Like, I think what you do is you think about the movie, what the person was trying to do, and if they were successful in doing that, and maybe how they weren't successful or could have altered it to make a slightly different result.
Yeah.
If somebody watches a movie and they get upset because of plot holes, that's not my job to fix. They're just saying they don't like that story, that it annoyed them for a certain reason. But I don't know. I wouldn't go in and try to say, like, well, the reason that you feel that way is because that's, I thought at first when you said they had an emotional reaction, I was going back to, like, say, A Hidden Life. And let's say somebody watched that and it was really upsetting to them to think about this person being in prison, and they were dealing with maybe some of the viewpoints they learned, or for instance, like what was that, the Martin Scorsese movie that's really good,
Silence, or The Irishman.
Yes, Silence. Not The Irishman. That's a really that's two very different movies.
Well, yeah. You'll get two very different emotional responses out of those movies. So
yeah, so Silence was a very challenging movie for me personally as a Christian, because they're challenging your whole viewpoint about what a missionary is supposed to do, and maybe what missionaries have done in the past, especially as they enter another culture, and saying that, okay, this is actually how this culture interpreted that, and you thought you converted somebody or showed them who Jesus was, and they accepted Christ, and but it's like, turns out no, they were thinking of it completely differently. And just seeing the main character's arc and what he goes through and how he lands, that, seeing that story itself could be very mind altering. So having somebody to walk with you on that journey and kind of repeat back to you maybe what you were feeling could be very healing and helpful, I think, as you go across it. But that's completely different than looking at the filmmaking and the storytelling. Like, I mean, I think objectively, so this is where it's funny. Objectively, that's a really good, even regardless of your personal beliefs about God or anything, that's a really good story that anybody from any belief could appreciate because of the great storytelling. But my personal viewpoint and how I react to that's kind of my own baggage that somebody with a similar view could help me unpack. But is that film criticism, or is that more I don't know, therapy?
I don't know. I definitely think there is an element to trying to lead for being a film critic and trying to lead deeper discussions about people's reactions. Like, I think I don't think you're wrong in that part of just the day-to-day job of being a film critic is understanding the medium and being able to convey how, like, different films use techniques to attain their goals, and saying how it does that effectively, good or ill, on an individual level. That's definitely the job of a film critic. But I do think that when I look at the bigger picture of criticism, I think that there is a role for trying to understand the public as a large and their reactions to things, and trying to gauge the movement of film in reaction to how people process them. If only just because that plays a role in how the movies get made in the future. I mean, 100 million people complain about one X movie, and then that movie series doesn't come back, or it gets rebooted with a different director, and the people's reaction to it is a part of the process, because film is a commercial medium. It is like that. You can't get away from the fact that film is completely tied to capital and money, and you have to factor in those responses. But even just that, I think part of when I talk to people about their reactions to film, being able to help people talk through these things, because ideally I'd like people to kind of be able to kind of not internalize it so deeply. Like, I'd like people to look at films somewhat, not coldly, but definitely with more of a remark that there's a level of response that you need to have certain things. When you look at Silence, that movie can absolutely mess with your worldview and mess with your perception of what a good Christian is supposed to be and how a Christian is supposed to act in the world. And I had very similar reaction to it. I had similar reaction to something like Hacksaw Ridge, which it's a little more clean cut in its morals, but it's definitely a movie where it asks a lot of the same questions in a similar way with the same actor too. So I think that there is an element of a film critic being able to diagnose the movements and processes within film, but also within the audience, and to try to use their pulpit to try to encourage them in some way to engage with the medium in a different way. I mean, back when I used to host weekly movie nights with my friends, I would try to get them to watch like movies they wouldn't watch normally, and a lot of times I got pretty negative reactions. Like I remember I showed, I did a movie night where I showed like Death of Stalin and Blood Quantum, and by the end of the night, by the end of both movies, everyone in the room was like, "Man, that got way too real," and I'm like, "Well, yeah, but it's still great." And that might be one of my, my disconnectedness with the greater film audience showing a little bit, but I'll admit that is probably a problem I suffer from, that it is kind of getting too deep into certain things. But I do think that there is an element of trying to understand people and understand how you can recommend certain things and get people interested in more complex art.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a place where when you are originally reviewing a movie, you can review the movie itself, but then later on, you might have a different kind of paper or article where you're kind of looking back and saying, what is the legacy of this movie and why did people react to it a certain way? I think those are different things, and that's almost like an analysis of culture rather than the movie. Like if you're talking about something like Star Wars, that has a huge impact on culture. So the fact that that's almost what you were doing in your paper, because you're looking at the different responses people had and how huge it was.
Which paper?
Caused these. I guess it was the plot holes are still dumb article.
Yeah. I'm gonna have to link. I'm gonna have to link all these articles in below. At some point, I want to build all of my thoughts on criticism into a book that I can just shove at people and be like, "This is what's wrong. This is everything that's wrong with this is what a film critic should be." But because
I think that what you were getting at there is very true. Is that this movie spawned all these people to come out, maybe some out of the woodwork, maybe some had always, but they made whole YouTube channels on their hatred of this particular movie and rants, and people love a good rant. But I mean, I don't know if a good rant is criticism, and I think you're also saying it's not.
A 5-hour rant about the logic plot holes in the Star Wars movie, it might feel cathartic, especially if you have a negative reaction to that movie. And I know lots of people that did not like the new Star Wars movies, and I'm not gonna sit here and say your emotional reaction to it is wrong. But when you start peddling, logic and plot holes as film criticism or as essential to the art form, I have to disagree, because that's not what storytelling is. Storytelling is supposed to be about delving into theme and emotional depth and an understanding another person's perspective. And when it doesn't work, it's usually because something about the film emotionally is the problem, not logically. If you're getting caught in the weeds of the logic, it's because you weren't engaged with the film to begin with, which that's the problem. Not being engaged by the art, not being swept up by it, not being sucked into the ideas, which I think that's part of the knot that I'm trying to untie with all of my, 100,000 word articles about the nature of criticism. It's trying to figure out where those knots are, because I don't think it's something simple. I think it's something rooted, and I'm trying to figure out what that is. And that's why I generally skew more into the cultural commentary, because at some point you when you hit these knots where you find all these bad criticism and you figure out where that is, it's not something on the surface. It's deeper. So that's why I tend to go more on the cultural criticism side of things. And I'm also pretty careful not to make my reviews like overtly partisan, in the sense of like, this movie is bad because X, this movie is bad because Y, because I look at these things as, I'm perfectly willing to entertain films on any side of the aisle or any belief system, just because it's art and I want to understand it. I want to process through these things. I mean, I just watched a bunch of like Soviet films last summer when I had a bunch of time, because I had like 100,000 movies in my movie stack I wanted to watch, and I'm like, oh, okay, I'll watch. What was it? Ivan the Terrible. Like, and I'm like, okay, this is clearly Stalinist propaganda, but like but when it comes to something like Star Wars, part of the reaction comes from the baggage you bring into it, and the knot I want to untie is less that it's okay to, not that it's not okay to have a negative reaction to the movies, just that understanding why that negative reaction is more important than digging through it and cathartically trying to disprove this movie is being objectively good by the number of plot holes in it, like CinemaSins does. It's more so that there's things, and it's also not the reverse side of things where you get the professional film critics who just dismiss every single one of the Star Wars critics as bigoted, evil, awful human beings that their opinions shouldn't be trusted, because I don't think that either. I think the knots are harder to identify, but I think that when trying to help people build a better film discourse, I want to figure out where they are.
Everybody comes into these things with a lens, and if you're not understanding what lens you're coming from, then you're going to have blind spots. But I think another thing we should talk about is that a film critic should love movies and movie making. and I think sometimes that's not the case. Somebody found a voice, they got an audience about their rants perhaps, and so they're like, well, people liked it, so I'm going to keep doing it. But if you just go on and on about how bad a certain movie was, but you never say what they could have done to make it better. I like to be an advocate of filmmakers because I love movies and I want to see people make good movies. So I like to encourage talent when I see it. So in part of my reviews, I always try to say what's something they did well and do something useful. If you just do a rant and you just smear somebody's work, that's not really criticism, and it doesn't take much talent to just insult somebody. So I think that's another thing I see is sometimes I see critics that I'm not convinced that they love movies. They just kind of like hearing themselves talk.
Well, this is what I meant when I said the democratization of film criticism. It's, because everyone's literally a critic. And I mean, it means that the voices that tend to match the collective emotional reactions tend to be the ones that get most popular. That's not always bad. There are a lot of good, online critics, and I could give you lists of people I could like and recommend. But at the same time, it also means that the louder voices tend to overpower the smarter voices, and the people that, in a lot of cases, you get people that just want to, vent, like you said, and their criticism becomes not only becomes popular, it becomes the collective narrative that everyone goes by, and I think that tends to get my goat a lot more than anything else. Just people who their methodologies become the popular methodologies just because they're drawing such heat and drawing such attention towards themselves. And when it comes to film criticism, you don't like what I'm saying. I can tell.
No, I do. I'm thinking. When you're speaking, I start thinking about things, and I'm going, no, it wasn't that I don't like what you're saying. It's like interesting. So I'm like, okay, now we're getting somewhere, because I mean, this is your bread and butter. Is you're like the people. I feel like we're really getting to something that's fit.
Yeah, and here's the thing too. I will not go after someone who's managed to make a good living for themselves doing this, because you know what? It's a hard world we live in. We live in the gig economy. If you can make a living, screeching about movies online, I will be jealous of you. I would sell out in a second to do what you do, because because I'd like to be rich someday. But you know what? Me being in my high castle and not making any money doing this, I feel perfectly justified in criticizing it. So I also think there's something to saying that I do think that their methodology is wrong. But I also get it. I get why they're popular. I'm not going to sit and say that, that everything they say is wrong, because usually it's not. And a lot of the times they are, smart and decent people. And when you sit down and talk with them, there will be perfectly decent people, and you could actually have a productive conversation with a lot of them about their processes and what their value sets are and what they think is important. Although some of them tend to be a little more rowdy than others. So it depends on who you want to talk about specifically. And I'm not going to name drop anyone specifically right now, but I could give you a list of people that annoy me. But
it's definitely a very competitive field. As you said, there's a lot of people that are in the swimming pool, all vying for attention. And you can get annoyed about it, or you can. I just prefer to kind of stick with the vein of, this is who I am, this is what I stand for, and try to be that person 100%, and know that there will be people that like what you're doing, and to continue to evaluate yourself and talk to other people you respect. If you find another critic you enjoy, or respect or admire what they're doing, as you kind of get into their sphere, you can ask them, what ways do you think I could improve, or how am I doing? And to kind of do that for yourself rather than spend time, I don't know, annoyed. I mean, everybody likes to be annoyed at something, but you see people that are doing things that are getting attention, and that can be hard. But another thing I like to do is find critics that have different views from me, and because everybody needs to be challenged, right? So you'd be like, okay, well, this person writes from a different lens, and I recognize that. Like, I'm a Christian white woman, so I'm going to find critics from different backgrounds, so that I'm not, because I know I have blind spots too. So learning how you differ from other people. You have, reading your content, you're doing things that I don't do, and it gives me an opportunity to think, well, sometimes, maybe I'm being a little too Mary Sunshine about this, I'm just in my lane doing my thing, but I also,
there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with just, doing what you're good at and doing what you particularly want to focus on. But I also definitely think that, if you're going to be like me and be very angry at very loud people on the internet, you got to put your money where your mouth is. And that's one of the things I've done in the last year. I mean, I don't know if you looked at my Geeks Under Gay stuff, but I do, 6,000 word literature reviews, and right now I'm starting very early on my Paradise Lost review, and it's going to take 4 months because I've got like 5 books of commentary I have to read on it. But people can't look at what I'm doing and say I'm not putting the effort in. Like I want to make sure I'm, actually putting content out there that does reflect my values and does reflect the fact that I want people to engage with art at a deeper level. So, and I hope that's something people get. Or one of the things I try to do with my articles is I write them in such a way that it makes the work accessible. Like, I take a very complex piece of literature and explain in a few thousand words what it means and how to read it and where it comes from, and why reading this 2,000 year old work of classical poetry is still relevant in some way, or how it connects to you in an apostolic sense. It's like, well, what is this book like? What did this piece of literature influence that I still read today? What is it? How does it connect to me? Why should I care about it? What roots will I see in it? I think that there's something, and I definitely want to, and it's something I definitely tried to do, and it is, giving people actual, pointing people in the right direction when I have the opportunity to. So, and that's something I've definitely used my, limited pulpit to do.
Right, and I think we meet over the Green Knight?
I think we might have, yeah, because I think I put out my call for a podcast host right after the big Green Knight thing, or was it Titus that put out that Green Knight recommended piece, or was it the one I did with Hannah? I'm trying to remember which one it was, because
somebody asked about Green Knight, and I think that's how our worlds first collided. But that's a that's a perfect example of this poem that was written many years ago is now being put onto the screen, and everybody who's a literature expert was just, what, this wasn't my grandma's Green Knight. What happened?
Exactly. I mean, I was among the more negative reviews out there, but I acknowledge readily that it's an amazing film to actually sit down and discuss, because you actually do get to engage with it really, really deeply, especially when you do know the source material and you see how the what's his name, the director, how he was changing it to update the themes to something contemporary. That's a great example of just like a really good like film that's worth discussing in the discourse. But I also get why people would, take one look at that and run away, because it's,
it just wasn't at all what, and I said this in my review, but it just wasn't at all what I thought it was going to be going in. Even the trailer was fuzzy enough, which I love a fuzzy trailer, and I mean fuzzy in that it doesn't give the whole movie away.
But yeah, the trailer really didn't give it. It was mostly just like the visual stuff, which that was great too. But
the tone, the atmosphere, it gave you a clue about that. But you're going in thinking, oh, this is going to be an epic poem of chivalry.
No,
and it wasn't.
It's about a very modern man stumbling into a medieval romance story and failing in every way humanly possible. But it does end up saying a lot. So I won't take, I won't bully it too hard. It was very good for what it was trying to do. But yeah, I mean, is there anything else we want to say about the nature of film criticism while we're finishing up, or do you? I mean, it feels like we're not going in circles, but we're hitting a lot of points, and I don't know what a good way to like summarize them is, especially since I imagine I'm probably going to have a couple angry people, to talk to after this. But
well, I'm curious, when you write, do you have? I think one of the things to consider is who your audience is, and you sort of alluded to that, but when you're thinking about how to write, do you have an audience in mind, like who you're writing to?
Usually I kind of base that off of where I'm writing at. When I write for Geeks Under Grace, I'm writing knowing that I'm talking to a moderately religious, politically all over the place audience of young people that are fairly engaged with the internet. So I kind of know I can talk to someone, they're probably somewhat literate. They probably read a lot of like all the famous nerd books. They probably watch a lot of the famous nerd movies. So I can speak to them knowing a certain level of cultural literacy based on my expectations for this group. I know I'm not going to offend them by talking about religion, and I probably don't want to talk about politics with them, because I know that at Geeks Under Grace in particular, that we have a very wide political swath of people. So I don't want to go into certain things in regards to that, because I know that's going to create tension. But alternatively, when I wrote for Reveler Media, I knew I was writing for a more overtly political audience. They had no interest in religious content, so I didn't write anything about that. But I did write very specifically about, the underlying themes of certain action movies, and what their ultimate goal was, and how they explore their themes, and what the virtue of certain kinds of action stars and vigilante philosophical themes is, because those tend to be the kind of movies that they wanted for that website. So it really just depends on who I'm writing to and who I'm dialoguing with. Like I'm not going to write the same style everywhere, and especially when it comes to something like cultural review, where the editorial was completely controlled by myself. I basically just wrote what I wanted to hear. Like I wrote things that were completely authentic to what I was emotionally frustrated with, and with the hope that it would be receptive by someone else. I don't know to what degree that was successful, because that website is not terribly trafficked. But it does. With that one in particular, I was almost entirely just talking to, throwing things out into the void to see if I could actually get any sort of traction, which it didn't. I couldn't tell you what did and did get traction with that site. I had to go back into the site metrics, but it really just depends on who I'm talking to. Like ultimately my goal is to try to help people understand their emotional reaction to things. So if I can do that by speaking people's language in a proper way, in a certain way, I'll do that, because I know that talking to people in a certain way is going to elicit a different reaction than it will to other people.
So it does sound like you alter your what you write according.
Not my opinions necessarily, just the tone and the what words I use, because I think because a part of just being persuasive when you write is understanding what people's judgments are beforehand.
Yeah.
I hope this is a productive conversation. I'm afraid that I might be airing too much stuff that's going to get me make a lot of people very angry. So I hope this is in some way insightful in all of this rambling on my part.
Well, I don't know. It's your channel. maybe you try to instigate the drama. Who knows? I think maybe a good place to leave it might be if you're a critic and how should you move forward doing this? And then as a person, like my take would be to go ahead and create your own mission statement of where you land with this, and maybe run it by a couple people that you trust and say, compare philosophies with somebody. And, that doesn't mean that one person's right and one person's wrong, but they might have a different viewpoint, and you kind of, again, you continue to update. I think I had added analysis. I had my original statement, and since then I've added analysis is important, and not just saying the facts, like the movie's about this. That's a summary. That's not a criticism. Determining what lens it's from, understand how this film is trying to intersect with culture. So you should come up with your own kind of statement, and then try to be that person. And then if somebody asks you how you think their work is, you can say, well, one thing I didn't understand was this X, Y, and Z. But I think it is good as a critic to come up with that, because you do get that question a lot. People will ask you, oh, so you're a film critic, so what do you do? And why is that important? Because
that's a good question, random person.
Yeah, no, I think that I saw something on Twitter not too long ago. People say all kinds of things on Twitter, but somebody said film critics are annoying because they just want to see free movies.
Yeah, I do generally think there is a frivolous element to film criticism. It is in a lot of ways a quite reactionary job line, especially if you take it seriously as something you want to do professionally, which a lot of people seem to do. Which, I don't make money off my film criticism, so I can, I can throw out as much as I want, and it doesn't make a difference in terms of my actual income. So, but yeah, do you have anything else you wanted to say on that point, or?
No, but I do like, if you're not a film critic and you're just a movie viewer, maybe follow more than one.
Yeah, that's something I definitely recommend. I could always come up with a list of people I would recommend based on my value sets and who I think are actually doing very good work, and all that stuff. And and based on your other point about what does a film critic actually do? I guess part of what I want to do is to try to give some legitimacy to criticism as a concept by taking it seriously, and saying that criticism exists for a reason, and while it's not always easy to actually articulate what that reason is, it's something that if you do actually take art seriously, it is something you should consider and consider seriously. But if it is just a frivolous career path, and we want to go down the the timeline in which film critics are all thrown into the furnace, and all that's left is the beautiful user reactions on Rotten Tomatoes. Then, all right, you're gonna get the art form you want out of that, guys. It's nothing. It's gonna be nothing but junk.
Yeah, and criticism itself should be viewed with a lens. Anytime you read a criticism of a movie and you find yourself reacting to it, it's another way you can step back and go, okay, why I agree with this person. If you're always reading people you agree with, that's not necessarily good either. But, people have different, like, if they make some good points, it might not be that they didn't make good points, but that they might be treading on something you hold really dear. So we all, like I said, we all come at this from lenses. But I do think, I like the point you made, which is that you want it to be a legitimate thing to do and take it seriously, because at the end of the day, that means people take movies seriously, which goes back to us loving movies. We want them to stay around and not stop. We want it to be something we love and something we enjoy. So we don't want it to be a joke that we're spending all this time thinking about the movies.
But I also accept that it is frivolous. Like it is for as much as I want to take it seriously, I also do recognize that I'm not the be all end all source of all virtue and reality as a film critic. I am not just like I recognize that I am reviewing movies for the internet. It's not the most important thing in the world. It is what it is, but trying to figure out the space where it's taken seriously and understanding that it is somewhat frivolous is part of my thought process nowadays, in terms of what should this thing be, how should it be, what is the purpose of it, how can I actually make a difference within the overall conversation, and all extremely difficult questions that I will probably mull over for the next 5 years and eventually try to spit out in some sort of way that's coherent and hopefully won't actually make people mad, because I don't like making people mad. I want people to be nice to each other. So I guess we should probably wrap up. Can you tell people where to find you online?
Yeah, absolutely. So I write on the website oneofmystories.com. That is the number one. You can also find me on Twitter and Instagram at oneofmystories.
There you go. I thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate you hearing my mad ramblings for the past hour and a half.
Thank you for having me.
Sure. Have a wonderful day.
You too.
The AntiSocial Network is a Groupthink Productions podcast. Editing, producing, and hosting are by Tyler Hummel, artwork by Crystal Cowley, and original music was composed by Melissa Lafira and the late Dan Smolla. Like, subscribe, and please let us know what you think about the show in the comments below if you'd like to see anyone interesting be a guest on the show. Thank you for listening.